There is a sugya in Chassidus, a discussion in Chassidus, that is called Ohr Mayim Rakia, which means literally light water or a liquid, and Rakia. Rakia means a coagulated liquid or a coalesced fluid that achieves some kind of a firmament, some kind of a hardness. Literally, Rakia means the sky, the expanse of the sky. But contextually, it means something which is more solid, more strongly bonded even than liquid molecules are in their relationships with one another. Ohr Mayim Rakia. Light, a liquid, a fluid, water, and Rakia means the fluid as it hardens, as it bonds together in a more solid state. I personally have a special liking for this discussion, and I think it's underrated. It doesn't get the attention that it deserves because of the profundity of the point that's being made. And I'm hoping to start tonight's class with a discussion on Ohr Mayim Rakia and the evolution from Ohr to Mayim, from Mayim to Rakia. There are three steps. Ohr is the highest step, Mayim is the second step, and Rakia is the lowest step. And the idea basically is this. We believe in spirit. We believe in ruchnius. We believe in the neshama. That means that we believe that the entire physical reality, and by the same token, metaphysical realities, in as much as they have a reality, has a neshama, has a soul, has a spirit. And we also understand that the neshama is non-physical, it's metaphysical, it's spiritual, and that somehow the non-physical soul meets the physical body. For the non-physical soul to meet the physical body, they both have to approach each other. The spiritual soul has to come close enough to the body to be able to give life to the body in a way that the body can relate to, and that the soul can be revealed and manifest. And the physical body needs to be organized enough and refined enough to raise itself, so to speak, to meet the life of the soul which is being manifest within it. In plain words, what I'm saying is we don't believe that life, and even all of physiology, but certainly organic, living physical things, are simply a combination of electrons and atoms and chemical order and organic chemistry that is organized, it's ordered in such a way that there's a series of electromagnetic currents that run through this biological machine to give it order and integration and communication and so forth. We believe that this incredibly complex physical machine, this living machine, is as organized as it is as harmonious and as integrated and as one as it is because of something transcendent, which is spiritual, which is the neshama. And human beings have souls, lahavdil animals have souls, plants have souls, and of course, according to that, even lifeless things that are called daimim, which means literally things that are silent, that speak nothing, also have some kind of a spiritual basis for their form and their order, which is the nefesh of a daimim, however we understand it. And in each case, needs to be a fusing, a coming together of the spirit and the material. Which leads to a simple assertion, a simple point. And the simple point is that more isn't always better. You imagine if $10 is a good thing, then $50 is a better thing, and $100 is better than that, then $1 million is better than that, then $1 billion is better than $1 million, and so on. It isn't always the case. Because in order for the human being to function, in order for the living thing to be functional, there needs to be moderation, needs to be balance, needs to be a closeness between the amount of capacity for life that the body has and the measure of the soul as it meets that body. And you can argue, and probably correctly, that if a body is better prepared, the body is more order, the body has more subtlety and more nuance, it's able to receive more life of the soul, and it probably does. It gets a higher measure of life or a higher form of life, a higher neshama, whatever particular language you want to use. But the constant is always going to remain that when something spiritual meets something physical, they have to actually co-join. They have to come together. In order for them to come together, the life of the soul has to be close enough to the material and the detail of the body for them to converge. Now, technically speaking, here's how you would say it. The material half is made up of pieces. Many, many pieces. And all these little pieces are glued together in an orderly fashion to accommodate life. And there are, millions of pieces, billions of pieces, trillions of little pieces that all converge in this order to accommodate life. The neshama, on the other hand, is the other way around. It starts out as one, as a singular point or essence. And as it approaches the body, it has to diversify. It has to go from one to many to meet a body which is going from many to one. The body is made up of so many parts. The soul has to accommodate all of those parts. And of course, the purpose of the meeting between the soul and the body is ultimately to make the many into the one. The sign of a living thing is integration, unity, and so on. But technically, you would articulate it this way. The body is going from many towards one, and the soul is going from one towards many. And as I said, more isn't always better, because it has to match, it has to fit, it has to converge, it has to come together. So now, having given you this basic introduction, let's think about this in philosophical terms and spiritual terms. There are many layers of spirituality, obviously. The higher up the spiritual chain you go, the richer it is, the more infinite it is, and the more unified it is. The lower on the spiritual chain you speak, the more finite it is, the more diverse it is, and the more limited it is. And we always face the question, from a spiritual perspective, should I shoot for higher where there's more? Or should I shoot for lower where I'm more likely to succeed? And of course the answer is, it depends on you, depends on your capability, depends on your work ethic. And we should always shoot for higher, but you have to shoot for higher in a reasonable way, in a measured way. And I'll explain to you how I mean this. In limud, in learning. Now we're talking only about ideas now. Seichel. There are higher ideas and lower ideas, deeper ideas and shallower ideas, simpler ideas, more complex ideas. And then there's also within each idea what's called the hafshata and the halbasha. An idea can be understood in a very esoteric and abstract form. And an idea can be brought down to a very manifest and precise form. When you understand something b'derech hafshata, when you take an idea and you understand it by divesting it from a particular form, you're getting at the idea in a purer state. When you get at the idea in a pure state, it's far more possible for you to misunderstand it or to not to understand it thoroughly. Conversely, when you take that idea and you bring it down to a level of halbasha, where you don't try to understand the idea in the abstract, but you understand the idea using a particular form or a particular example, you're more likely to understand the idea correctly, but you're also understanding less of what the idea is. And this is all relative to us. A smaller person understands less, a greater person understands more, and so forth and so on. And of course the entire challenge is to grow in our broadening of our vessels, of our kalim, to be able to be open to receive a finer and a higher and a more exalted light, as it were, if you will. Okay. Now, within the realm of ideas, there are a lot of levels. There are ideas that deal with physical things. Ideas that deal with physical things you can understand very directly because you know what physical things are. In addition, ideas that deal with physical things you can prove very absolutely by measuring physical things, by making certain predictions and getting certain results. You can make certain determinations and so on. When you deal with spiritual ideas, non-physical ideas, obviously they're more difficult to understand because you can't see them. And they're also more difficult to understand because you can't prove them as concretely. And to give you an example, which we have talked about in the past often, is that the age in which we live, and this is not my field, so I'm just going to speak to this a little bit, and I trust that the little bit that I'm going to say is not going to be incorrect. In the world, in the secular world, they have limited the definition of knowledge to physical things. What can you know? What can you understand? What can you prove? Or the word that they would choose is, what can you determine as a fact? Only things that you can prove directly by making experimentation, tests, and creating experiments which would predict how things should fall out, assuming that your hypothesis, your prediction, your interpretation of the physical fact is correct. And when you make an experiment and it turns out correct, so you know you have what's called a workable theory. Anything which isn't physical, there is the dirty word that the intellectuals use. They don't want you to know it's a dirty word, but the dirty word that intellectuals use is the word philosophy. When a scientist wants to insult you, he says your idea is very intelligent, wonderful, but it's philosophy. Philosophy means unprovable. And unprovable means it's not a fact. And it's not a fact means that's a waste of time. That's the unfortunate reality. That's what's become of us as intellectuals. That if it's not physically provable, we can't prove it absolutely. And if we don't really regard intellectually as real. And of course, you understand how terrible a problem this is when you're talking about spiritual things like angels, like souls, like alakus, like godliness, and of course, above all else, like God Himself, la'avl. Because these are things which are non-physical, and you can't use physical rules and physical experimentation and physical prediction to determine these things. So they're all relegated into this big basket, this big heap, this big pile called philosophy, which means very nice, but not to be taken very seriously. Now, of course, we obviously disagree categorically. We disagree with the limitation on what's considered real and what's considered a fact and what's considered a proof for a variety of reasons. And most importantly, most notably, it's because we have a munah. We have a munah that Hashem gave us the Torah and revealed the truth in the Torah, Gila, Seide, Dvora, Vadeh, Avadav, Nevi'im. And in the Torah, we know things that are not physical, that you cannot prove physically. We even know things that are higher than logic. We know things that are higher than philosophy itself. In other words, there is reality to ruchnius, even if you can't prove it using physical, scientific methods, you can prove it using logic, using philosophy. And some ideas which we have, what we call Kabbalah, Hina Kabbalah, we know them because they were given to us by Ruach HaKodesh. Now, one of the areas of knowledge in this conversation is called Chakira, philosophy. Philosophy used to be, go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, very, very important. It was the equivalent of science today. It was considered the basis for how you determine truth. Today, nobody takes philosophy seriously. It's people learn it, people are interested in it, but is it fact? Is it provable fact? These are very, very subjective things because they're metaphysics, they're not physical things. But a long time ago, this is how people made determinations about truth. And Torah believed and continues to believe that when you cannot prove something physically, that doesn't mean you cannot prove it. You can argue and show that certain things must be a certain way, even if you can't make a physical experiment to be able to test it. But there's a key component to this reality or discussion. And that is that in an age where people did not use physical measurements and physical things to determine what's real, the integrity of the intellectual was much more important. That means if you're studying physical science, it doesn't make a difference if you're a pious person or you're an evil person, because the credibility of what you say is based on the proofs that you give that anybody can test and anybody can measure. When you're talking about metaphysics, ruchnius, higoyin, philosophy, it becomes much, much more difficult to determine what's true and what's false. What's with integrity and what's without integrity. And therefore, in the realm of philosophy, the criteria for who could determine what is philosophically sound or not had much, much more to do with the integrity of the intellectual. And there was a shita that said that if you are to be a philosopher, you need to be a parush. A parush means you need to live a pure life. You need to live a life that's not materialistic and not political and not jealous. Because a person whose personal life was corrupt, a person whose personal life was perverse, a person whose personal life was biased, couldn't possibly have clarity or objectivity when it came to his philosophical arguments and pursuits, because they would cloud his judgment. In other words, there was a greater connection between the integrity of the human being and the human being's mind when they were studying philosophy than the personal integrity of the human being and the human being's mind when he studies physical things. Because physical things are much easier to determine, relatively speaking, absolutely, than metaphysical things. So if a person wanted to be a choiker, a philosopher, a thinker, it wasn't enough that he was smart and that he studied the techniques of abstract reasoning and how you make determinations by processes of elimination and so on, however Hakira works. But you have to be seeking truth. And whether one seeks truth, or as the expression is, one shoots an arrow and then draws the bullseye around it so it should appear true, is very, very important. And in order for a person to be considered a seeker of truth, he had to live an ascetic life, he had to live the life of a parush, which affected the objectivity of his ability to reason. And if a person lived a life of precious, then you said when he comes up with a logical thought, with a philosophical thought, his personal integrity affects the integrity of his ideas. And you can trust more that his ideas are going to be logic without a bias, logic without wanting a certain conclusion to come out. Because when you're talking about metaphysical things, when you're talking about spiritual things, when you're talking about ideas of logic, they're not connected to physical things, the personal integrity of the person is much, much more important. But there's an even higher level than this. What's the higher level than this? The higher level than this is when one crosses over from the level of understanding things philosophically to experiencing things spiritually. In other words, Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh, and on a higher level, Nevuah, it's not magic. It's not that Hashem comes to a person and gives you an idea. That's not the way it works. Ruach HaKodesh, and on a higher level, Nevuah, means you have a mind. And you have used your mind to the maximum of your capabilities. Right? And if we would talk through this progression that I've just proposed, first you would learn simple ideas, physical ideas. And then you would ascend from physical ideas to metaphysical ideas. And of course, along with that progression, along with that journey, it would be necessary for you to be more precise, to have greater integrity in your mahus and your whole person. So there's greater integrity to your ideas. But there's a point at which the human mind stops. There's only certain capabilities of a person to understand ideas and to know truths and so forth. So of course we talk about in Torah and in Chassidus there's a notion of inspiration from comes from Hashem, divine inspiration. Inspiration that comes from Hashem means your mind could not get there by itself. But on the other hand, the inspiration is reaching your mind. Something which is above your mind is reaching your mind. In other words, Ruach HaKodesh is the end of Chokhmah, right? If you have in the Hayem Yem, right, there's a Hayem Yem, which talks about Simchas Beis HaSheyeva, Shemisham Shayavim Ruach HaKodesh. And the Rebbe brings from the Friedrich Rebbe that says in Yerushalmi and the Karban Ha'eda that it has to do with the Talumis Chokhmah. In other words, Ruach HaKodesh begins where Seichel ends. The human mind has certain limits, because the human mind needs to have some kind of form, or to use the Isis of Chassidus, it needs to have oisius, and there's a transition, there's a point where you go from what you're able to understand philosophically to an inspiration that comes from the Eibishter, Ruach HaKodesh. And when it comes to Ruach, if it's true that personal integrity is important, when it comes to Higoyim, when it comes to Derech HaSeichel, when it comes to philosophy, the credibility of one's Ruach HaKodesh, in other words, whether one has an enlightenment, and this enlightenment is emes, and this enlightenment is kedusha, the personal integrity of that person matters even more. Which is, of course, why Chazal say that ein hanevuah shoida ruach hakodesh, and nevuah do not rest unless a person has all kinds of exactness in his personality, in his control over the Yetzer Hara, and in his lack of pursuit of material wealth, and his lack of jealousy, and so on and so forth. These are all prerequisites for a ruach hakodesh to reach a person, and to reach a person in a proper way. And of course, the way Ruach HaKodesh works is the Eibishter gives you an inspiration, and you interpret that, you have to understand it with your mind. And you take the inspiration that the Eibishter gives you, that you understand with your mind, and you actually teach it to somebody else that is able to understand it. So in effect, what's happening here is that the Eibishter is giving you an idea of Seichel, that your Seichel cannot get by itself. You have to have it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you the Ruach HaKodesh, it's not something which is separate from your mind. It raises the mind up. It lifts you up. It makes your mind bigger and stronger. But it's incredibly abstract, incredibly ruchniistic, impossible to prove. And as I said before, which is why the integrity of the Baal Seichel, the Baal Ruach HaKodesh, is so much more important than when you're learning simple things and low things and, if you will, provable things, physical things. To give you a couple of examples, and I'm talking much longer than I would have expected in my introduction, but let's keep going. To give you a couple of examples, there's a famous story with the Rebbe Rashab and Chaim Ber, which I will tell you very briefly because I've told the story at length in the past. Come upon him. That the Rebbe Rashab asked a Chosid Pshat and a Mayim in Chassidus, Nimrei Bina, and the Chosid didn't answer. And the Rebbe Rashab complained to another Chassid, Hayitochan, I asked Reb Chaim Ber, Shaila, and finished. So the end of the story was that the Rav of Kremenchuk went back home and he said to Reb Chaim Ber, Hayitochan, the Rebbe asks you a question, you don't answer. So Reb Chaim Ber said to Rabbi Yitzchak Yael Rafalovich, the Kremenchuk Rav, who came with the complaint, the Rebbe probably did not tell you what it was that he wanted from me, because if he had told you what he wanted from me, you would have understood why I didn't answer him. He said, he asked me a question in a Mayim Chassidus. And then he said, he doesn't need me. He'll figure it out all by himself. The Rebbe needs the help of a Chassid. And the end of the story was that Reb Chaim Ber came to Lubavitch, and the Rebbe Rashab stood and watched him daven for a very, very long time. And then when he walked away, he said the following: is gerecht. Ich habe sich gekannt einkehren ohne. Ich habe gewollt aber wissen, sie da mit Seichel allein können durchgehen. And in English this means, he's right, I didn't need his help to understand the Maimer. So why did I ask? Because I wanted to know if this is an idea that can be understood intellectually alone, or you can only understand that you have Ruach HaKodesh. In other words, the Rebbe has Ruach HaKodesh. And Ruach HaKodesh and the mind touch. And they touch in the kind of way that there is a point of abstraction of ideas which is so fine, then you're not sure if you understand it or if you feel it. And the only way you can determine that you understand it is you ask somebody that you know doesn't have Ruach HaKodesh. And if they understand it, then you know it's understood. And if they don't understand it, you're not certain whether you understand it, whether it's come into your mind or it's speaking directly from the soul. This is how it works. Ruach HaKodesh is an inspiration, then you have to find language and form to bring it down to the level of Seichel. The Rebbe spoke about Mashiach. The Mashiach is going to reveal Teirach Adosha v'derech Nevuah. And the Rebbe asked the question, this is the famous Sikha, which he spoke Shvuas, Tofshin and Aleph, Teirach Adosha Miti Teitze, where the Rebbe asked the question, how could Mashiach reveal Teirach v'derech Nevuah? The halacha is Teirach leiba shamayim hi v'ein navi rashi l'chadash davar mayata. You're not allowed to use Nevuah to expound on the Teirach. So the Rebbe gave a very involved explanation. And the point of it, the Nekudas Abir, was that Mashiach is going to reveal the secrets of Torah, what's called Helam Sheni B'Metzias, using Nevuah. But after he experiences the enlightenment, he's going to understand it and explain it to people who don't have Nevuah. And if they understand it, then it's Seichel. If they don't understand it, then it's not Torah. In other words, it doesn't become Torah because he sees it. With his powers of prophecy, it becomes Torah when someone without Nevuah and without Ruach HaKodesh understands it. So now it's been brought to the level of Torah. That's Bekitzah, that's briefly what the Rebbe says. And that's how Ruach HaKodesh works. You experience an enlightenment, and from the enlightenment, you bring it down to a Madrega of Seichel. Now, using this platform, this mashal that I just spent quite a bit of time developing, you can understand a little bit of the phenomena of Ohr Mayim Rakia. Ohr Mayim Rakia basically means there can be a higher enlightenment and a lower enlightenment. A higher prophecy, a lower prophecy. And for that matter, a higher understanding of an idea and a lower understanding of an idea. A physical thing is easy to understand, or it's understood on a basic level. A philosophical thing is much more subtle. And it's more difficult to understand because you never understand it directly, understand it indirectly. And you have to sense it rather than understand it thoroughly and comprehensively. And of course, accordingly, the personal integrity of the Baal Seichel is so much more. And then when you add to that the dimension of Ruach HaKodesh, this is an even a higher level. The point is that everything that we understand on a lower level was once part of a greater understanding on a higher level. And what we could understand on a higher level was once part of an even greater idea, understood on a higher level still. There's a vart in the name of the Rogatchover, and I believe it's in the Rebbe Siches, which I think is very helpful in illustrating this point. That the Rogatchover used to say that Kol HaTeira Kula Nekuda Achas. All of Torah is one point. And he would add, for me, the Torah is Eser Nekudas, for me the Torah is 10 points, but if I understood the Torah even more deeply, they understand it. Currently, I would say it's all one. In other words, ideas are fluid. Ideas cross each other, and they go in and out of each other. The separation of ideas is based on the limitations of the intellectuals. A simpler person needs to divide ideas into areas, into disciplines, into physical components in order for a person who has lesser intelligence to understand. But for one who has greater intelligence and he can understand things on levels of greater abstractions, he sees more unities, more connections. And it's not pseudo-intellectual and simplified unities and connections. It's deep and with integrity unions and connections, because he understands it deeply. And the more of a Baal Seichel one is, the more deep one's mind is, the greater unity he sees. So the Rogatchover is saying, in effect, that simple people learn the Torah, see the Torah as being made up of thousands of individual ideas. When one gets smarter and learns more, and primarily learns deeper, they start to see the unity between ideas, even extremely diverse areas of Torah, the halachas of Tum and Tare, and the halachas of Momenis, and the halachas of Yom Tif, oftentimes share philosophical, theoretical ideas that are constant, that are the same. And the deeper one goes, the greater unity they have. And the ultimate unity is that the whole Torah is one idea. And to me, the Rogatchover says Torah is 10 ideas. And as a student of mine once asked me, if the Rogatchover understands the whole Torah as 10 ideas, all he has to do is tell those 10 ideas to us, and we'll know the whole Torah. And of course, all of us understand how silly that is. Even if the Rogatchover could find words to articulate those 10 ideas, we would have no capacity to understand them because they're too abstract, they're too ruchniistic. So, as often happens when people learn abstract things, this is one of the biggest phenomena that you see when people decide that they're ready to learn Kabbalah. So they open up Sifrei Kabbalah and they start to read, and I understand and explain. And they don't even begin to understand what they don't understand. They don't appreciate what's written there. They don't appreciate how the words, the language, is speaking to ideas that are so high and so spiritual that they just completely miss it. And they create a distortion, which is pathetic. And that's a mashal for this idea called Ohr Mayim Rakia. Everything that exists comes from Hashem. And Hashem is one. And it emerges from Hashem in a state of oneness. We call that Ohr, Ein Seif. Ein Sof has Ein Sof. Ein Sof is translated as infinity. But in Ein Sof, you don't have infinite detail. You have infinite unity. The spirit of all that is integrated into one single light. And not only the spirit of all that is, the spirit of all that can be. If there would be, an infinite number of universes with an infinite number of different systems of how their laws and how they would be governed in the Ein Sof, it's all part of that greater unity. Ohr. And of course, to relate to Ohr Ein Sof is a virtual impossibility. Although we talk about Hishtalshalus and Gilui and how Nevuah has a connection to Ohr, but it's very, very abstract. So what happens is you go from a higher level to a lower level in this discussion is that the Ohr becomes Mayim. That means to say the abstract oneness of all that is, as it's included in the level of Ohr, becomes more, I can't use the word material because we're dealing with Ruchnius and not Gashmius, it becomes more pronounced, more felt. And as that occurs, the one begins to become many. And the lower it goes, the closer it comes to us, and the more, if you will, detail emerges from the unity as it's going towards the many in order to be able to relate to us and to a world and to a creation which is defined by many, defined by diversity. So an idea, for example, as it exists on the level of Ohr, is part of the infinity of all ideas. An idea on the level of Mayim is how that idea has become more manifest. And by the virtue of the fact that the idea has become more manifest, the divisions within the Ohr that account for one becoming more begins to emerge. And then when you come to the level of Rakia, here it congeals, it hardens, it becomes distinct, it becomes fixed. So Ohr is how all ideas exist in a maximum state of unity. In Rakia is how ideas exist in a maximum state of manifestation. And Mayim is a level in between, where it's no longer as abstract as it is in Ohr, and it's not yet as concrete as it's going to be in Rakia. To use the Ruach HaKodesh as the illustration, on the level of Ruach HaKodesh, all of the Torah is part of one great light. On the level of human understanding, the Torah begins to diversify into many different distinct ideas. And technically, when they talk about Ohr Mayim Rakia, the terms that they use are Keser, Chochma, and Bina. Ohr would be Keser, Mayim would be Chochma, and Bina would be Rakia. And there's many, many other allusions, but that's one of the basic ones. And technically what that means is, in Keser there are no Oisius, there's only Ohr. In Chochma there's the beginning of Oisius, but the Oisius are very bottled to the Ohr. And in Bina, the Oisius are very, very pronounced. So the idea is the same. But as the idea exists on the level of Keser, it's part of the infinity of ideas, the infinity of light. And there isn't anything to affect the pronouncing of the divisions within that infinite possibility. In Chochmah, as we learn about it in Chassidus, there's the beginning of the division. The ideas become enlightenment, flashes, individual flashes, distinct flashes, but each flash has so much possibility and so much plasticity. The expression that is used is water is naid. Water has a adhesive quality. Water molecules stick to each other, but they're fluid. They move around. So they're more concrete than the way they exist in Ohr, but they're not as concrete as they're going to exist in Rakia. So Chassidus will occasionally bring this model of Ohr Mayim Rakia to attempt to enlighten the idea of the descent of something from a higher level to a lower level. The purpose of this particular form is that they want to talk about the light itself. They don't want to talk about the body, they want to talk about the soul itself. The soul is one. And on the highest level, the soul is one in the way of Ohr. Ohr means to say, the soul on the level of Ohr does not have any distinct parts. The whole soul sees, for example. The whole soul hears. The whole soul feels. The whole soul tastes, because there's no divisions. As the soul is going to descend towards the body, it's going to have to diversify. That one part of the soul is going to sustain the eyes that see, another part of the soul is going to sustain the ears that hear, another part of the soul is going to sustain the nostrils that smell, and so on. You see, but the body is going to make real divisions. As the soul descends from a higher level to a lower level, the divisions are all theoretical still, because there's only ruchnius. But the ruchnius is coming closer to be able to be completely or truly divided up when it's going to reach the guf. And that's what's unique about this form, of this mashal, this idea of Ohr Mayim Rakia. Ohr is pashut, Mayim is pashut, and Rakia is pashut. But the pshitas of Ohr is the furthest away from tzir. The pshitas of Mayim is closer to tzir. And the pshitas of Rakia is so close to tzir that tzir, so to speak, takes it over. But the tzir is out, just like the tzir is separate from the Ohr, the tzir is separate from the Mayim, and the tzir is separate from the Rakia. This is the discussion of Ohr Mayim Rakia. And again, the point is, Chassidus is trying to get us to appreciate the concept of abstraction. Right? That's the deal. We live in a very applied world. And when Chassidus talks about metaphysics, it talks much, much more than understanding physical things. It talks about much, much more than understanding things altogether. It talks about enlightenment and Ohr. And Chassidus has to find language and form, as the famous expression is, to allow us to relate to spiritual things, to abstract things, to godly things, to transcendent things in a way which is as close to the truth as is humanly possible. Because our tendency is to materialize everything. Our tendency is to give form to everything. Our tendency is to create a body for each. And in Ruchnius, there isn't body, there is neshama. And the higher you go, the less body there is, and the more neshama there is. The less division there is, and the more unity there is. So one of the ways that Chassidus attempts to articulate the abstract nature of Ruchnius is by saying that everything that comes down, even in as much as it's spiritual, the lowest level of spirituality would be called Rakia. The second level of that spirituality would be called Mayim, and the highest level of spirituality would be called Ohr. Ohr Mayim Rakia. An idea descends from a higher, more unified spiritual place to a lower, more formed spiritual place through the steps of Ohr Mayim and Rakia. Now the reason for this discussion, which is going on almost for 40 minutes, is to discuss Perek of Ohr Mayim Basi Legani. I chose to have this conversation with us without a context, because I wanted to make it clear. And I hope I made it clear, number one, and I hope I didn't use sfas yester. It wasn't too verbose, which could be confusing. I know that I talked a lot, but hopefully it allowed us to relate to the idea in a correct way a little bit. How does it come up in the Maimer? Because our Maimer is talking about Amud, and we're translating the word Amud as a beam. Now, someone pointed out to me that physically a beam are the horizontal beams in a ceiling, and the vertical beams that run from floor to ceiling should be called columns. But we're using the word beam because the word beam is very convenient. It allows us to incorporate two ideas into one word, one English word. The Hebrew word, of course, is amud, but the Hebrew word is beam. There is a beam or a column which holds the ceiling up, and there's a beam of light which brings the light from a higher level to a lower level. And our Maimed is teaching us that when you build the Beis HaMikdash, or the Eskafia V'eshapcha, and you create Krashim, you're zeicher to Amudim. And the Rebbe said, Amud has two translations. Amud means a beam, means like a physical column which sits on the ground and reaches up into the sky. And Amud means a beam of light which ascends from a higher level to a lower level. And the Rebbe made a fascinating argument. The argument that he made was that all matters of metaphysics, all matters of Ruchnius, including the Ruchnius de Kemochama with the Yetzer Hara, including the Ruchnius de Kemochama v'Eskafi v'Eshapcha to transform Kedusha into Klipa. And I saw in another Maimon where the Rebbe takes it even one step further. Even the Ruchnius of Kabbalah Seil itself, anything which has to do with the psychological side, the spiritual side of the person, conforms to the laws of Amud, or beam, which has to do with the beam of light. And how does the beam of light work? That the Yesod, the foundation, is Lamaila, and the Amud is Lamata. It comes from heaven to earth. On a higher level it's more, on a lower level it's less. There's only one exception to that rule. Only one. And the one exception to that rule is the actual physical act of doing a mitzvah. Any spirituality associated with that physical act, whether it's the kavana, or it's the iskafia, or it's the milchama, that's all part of the ruchnius. And when it comes to ruchnius, the way an amud works, it's a beam of light that's more higher and less lower. Only when it comes to actual physical act do we use the physical analogy, the analogy of a physical column, a physical amud, which sits on the ground. And of course the argument is the physical world has a source in Atzmus Musa in Sav Baruch Hu. The Yesh HaNivra is a reflection of the Yesh HaMiti, the physical Yesh, the physical creation, that in its lifelessness, in its dormancy, in its silence, is a Yesh, exists in a way they don't know its source. And that Yeshus comes from Atzmus Musa as an expression of the Yeshus of the Eibishter himself. So our Maimer's argument is that when a Yid serves Hashem, the Eskafi of his Hapch, he brings an incredible amount of light from heaven to earth, a beam of light from heaven to earth. But when he then does the actual physical mitzvah, he's creating a beam from earth to heaven, and this is Atzmus as opposed to Giluyim. This is more or less what Perek Beis and Gimel and then Perek Hey on the next page are discussing. In explaining this, the Rebbe goes off to discuss this discussion, what's called Emen, Aleph Mem Reish, Ohr Mayim Rakia. And initially he's going to argue that Ohr Mayim Rakia are a succession. First Ohr, then Mayim, then Rakia. Obviously, Ohr is the most spiritual, the most abstract, the most plain, the most a reflection of its source. And Mayim, how is Mayim the Naid, it's beginning to congeal, it's beginning to coalesce, even though it has loose bonds, because liquid is fluid. And then, of course, then it becomes a solid. The aglidu maya, it congeals, it coalesces into a solid state, which is even lower than maya. And these three steps are describing how ruchnius comes from a higher level to a lower level. This entire model of Ohr Mayim Rakia is consistent with the spiritual concept of a beam, where the Yesod is Lamaila, the foundation is above, and then the light is below. But the Rebbe wants to argue that there's two concepts in Ohr Mayim Rakia. And he brings Emer, he brings Ohr Mayim Rakia into our Maimer to help understand both ideas. The first idea is obvious, that in a higher level there's greater light, Ohr, in the middle level there's a lesser light, Mayim, and the lowest level there's even less light, which is Rakia. But he also wants to argue the idea that on the very, very lowest level, there's a possibility, there's a prospect where you can have a connection to the very highest level, based on the idea that whatever falls lower must have a higher source, or what has a higher source is able to descend lower. And this is the discussion we're about to embark upon, and this is why I gave you this lengthy discussion in Ohr Mayim Rakia, because the Rebbe is now going to explain it here in the Maimer, and he's going to explain it in two aspects. So let's not waste any time. Perek Dalet. Now, when I begin to read, you may not immediately see what I told you. But as we journey through this page, it'll become more and more apparent. Okay, so let's begin. Says the Rebbe in Perek Dalet, however, there's an outstanding question. Mipnei ma? Why is it that Yesh HaNivra Dafka, the physical Yesh, the created Yesh, a Yesh which is created by Hashem in such a fashion that it is projected, it is thrown, it is catapulted, so to speak, to be separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the maximum degree that it should be a Yesh HaNivra. It's created, and it denies any association with its source. And in the Yesh HaNivra, Hu Yesh HaAmiti, hidden within the false ego of the physical creation, which is in total denial of a source, you have the true ego, which is the independence, the self-sufficiency of Hashem himself. Why is it not true that ve'eini nimtza beruchni? It is not true in the spiritual realms also. If down here there could be an expression of the truth of Hashem, why can't there be a similar expression in the higher worlds? The argument should be the contrary. It should be that Yesh HaAmiti, the truth of Hashem's ego or independence or self-sufficiency, should be beruchnius anyanim, on a spiritual level, ubenyanim ruchnim, in spiritual things, shelachei nikroyim b'shem elyonim, which is why they're called higher, supernal. Lefi shem nailim b'madrega, they're a higher level. And the argument is, it's a koshken v'chavachem. But exactly the reverse. If Yesh Ha'amiti, if the truth of Hashem's independence and ego can show itself at the very end of the chain, at the lowest level, you have a world which by its basic nature denies a creator completely. And in this world, which by its basic nature denies a creator completely because it reflects only on its own existence and shows in no way a dependency of anything outside of itself, and as such is exposing the secret of Yeshus, the idea that there is a God whose existence is by definition dependent on nothing else, the spiritual world should show that even more. And it's not the case. The spiritual world, to use a classic terminology, is ayin. And you may recall that last year we learned the Hemshech Maimorim of the Rebbe from Tafshin Tezvov, I believe, Tafshin Tezayin, the Maimorim, we started at Yom Tov Tzeit and went till Yom Kislev. The 5 Maimorim on Yesh, Ayin, Ayin, Yesh. And in the Ruchniyizdek world, you don't have Yeshus, you have only Ayin. The Rebbe says, why? If the Ruchniyizdek worlds are closer to the Yesh HaMiti, they should reveal the Yesh HaMiti more. And the answer is, the Mittler Rebbe explains it, but the Rebbe immediately goes into the Mishalem. Gimel, Mishalem, Be'inyan uses 3 different illustrations to explain or to illustrate or to give examples for the idea of Kol HaGaveya, Gaveya B'Yosir, whatever is higher and higher still, Yedid Lamat, Yedid, Mislabish, Umizgale, descends, reveals its, manifests itself, and reveals itself, but Namach Yosir, in what's lower and lower still. There's a double Lashon, Gaveya, Gavoya, and then a Yosir, and then there's a double Lashon, Namach, and then Yosir. Now before we get to the Misholim that the Mittler Rebbe brings, before we get to the illustrations that the Mittler Rebbe brings, this phrase is the answer to the question, basically. Why is it that only the Yesh HaAmiti, the true Yesh, why is it that the Yesh HaNivra, only the Yesh of creation, which is the very lowest state, because it has no spiritual awareness of itself, let alone of things outside of itself, is a vehicle for the idea of the true Yeshus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Atzmas Ein Seif, and the spirituals are not? And the answer is very simple, because since it's lower as a higher source. And ultimately, the lowest thing, which is Yeshus, comes from the highest source, which is the true Yesh. And things above it, because they're closer to the truth, are farther away from this manifestation. Because they're experiencing some level of light, or proximity, or enlightenment, or awareness, or understanding, it is therefore not able to have the Yeshus. So this is the answer. That because it's fallen lower, it has a higher source. But the Rebbe is going to develop it, the Mittler Rebbe, by using 3 examples. Now, on the face of it, these 3 examples of the Mittler Rebbe seem to be quite arbitrary. And I just want to share this briefly. The Mittler Rebbe has a habit of explaining things by bringing many different Mishalem. There's some instances where he brings 4 or even 5 Mishalem that I have seen, let's say, the Shadayeda and other places. And some of them seem very curious, seem very random, seem so of no importance. And you have occasions, other occasions, besides this one, where the Rebbe will analyze why he has 3 Mishalem, or 4 Mishalem, and 5 Mishalem, and show how each Mashal is saying a different point. And that's what's going to happen here, but first let's read the Mishalem. Mashal Aleph, Ha'aleph, the first example the Mittler Rebbe brings on page Samach Zayin. 5 lines into Perek Daled, Humeyavuka Gedelef, from a great torch. She'oira Gadol Umeira L'Merachak, his light is great, and it radiates to great distances. And accordingly, when you want the light to reach the most distant, the most remote place, the torch has to be even larger, even greater. So, if you want to send a light a distance of 10 feet, you can have a candle. You want to send a light of a distance of 100 feet, you need a greater torch. You want to send a light across the universe, you need the maximum, the most powerful stars, in the greatest concentration that can carry a light such great distances. The irony, of course, is that when the light reaches the remote place, it's going to appear very small. It may even appear smaller than a candlelight that's much closer. But in order for the light to come to a remote place, in its distant source, it has to be more prominent, it has to be stronger. And the stronger it is, the lower it reaches. This is a classic illustration of Kol HaGaveya, Gaveya B'Yosir, Yed Lamata Mata B'Yosir. Since it's a greater light in its source, it reaches a more remote distance in its manifestation. So he explains. Im Kain movement, it's therefore understood. In order to see the evidence of just how great that torch is, Yiddish. How do you know how great a star is? How do you know how great a torch is? And the answer, of course, is compared to a candle or a smaller torch. You see how far it travels. And the farther it travels, and the more crisp the light in a remote place, the more it's revealed how acute, how great its source is. This reveals the greatness of this torch. Notwithstanding that the light that reaches the low place, is tiny, it's a very small light, like the light of stars that we see in the night sky, for example. Even an ordinary candle will be brighter than the twinkle of a star, which is light years away. Nevertheless, this tiny little light, the fact that it's traveled this great distance, is evidence of mailas v'teikef avuk, the advantage and the power of that torch. So the Rebbe gives a mashal to illustrate the point of what has a higher source falls lower from light. A greater light reaches and touches a greater distance. And of course the argument is, only at a distance will you fully appreciate how great the source is, because only at a distance is it a chiddush that the light is still reaching it. So this mashal conforms with the basic philosophical point of kol the higher the source, the lower it manifests. And of course the nimshal is going to be that Yesh HaNivra is manifesting the Yesh HaAmiti because it's farther away, because it's from a higher source. Mashal Abayis, the second example, if you have a barrel that's full of water, so the barrel is filled to 80% capacity, 90% capacity, the barrel is able to contain it. What happens if it becomes full and overfull? And he gives a second illustration within this class, or a wise person full of wisdom. Now, without getting into the conflicts and the difficulties here, he sees water and ideas in the same category, as opposed to light, which is a different category. Now, how water and ideas are closer to each other than light, the only way to understand it is because we're dealing with Mayim in contrast to Ohr, as you're going to see soon, and as I explained to you in my introduction. When the water in the barrel is a lot, they say it's filled to its brim. If it's full to capacity, it spills outward. And only when the water spills out of the barrel. Of course, one of the ways it's described is if the barrel is so full that it can't contain it, and it creates a crack, and then water shoots out of that crack. That tells you what's inside the barrel. Says the Rebbe, only the water that goes out of the barrel, do you have an idea of the concentration of water within the barrel? And the same, of course, is true when it comes to ideas. Notwithstanding, the water that spills out of the barrel is waste. It's spillage. And insignificant compared to how much water is inside the barrel. At the same time, the little water that spills out, it shows the barrel is full. The same is true with ideas. Sometimes the person has so many ideas in his head that it plasses out. The intelligence of a real intellectual is measured by Neilis Chacham. Neilis Chacham means what falls. He doesn't even intend to communicate, it sort of comes by itself. That if a person is incredibly steeped in wisdom, ideas, so to speak, fall from him inadvertently, without intent, and certainly not with a direct communication. But the fact that profound ideas can sort of fall from such a person inadvertently reveals just how great a chacham that person is. Like you have in the Maimer of Chassaneh, for example. That Talmud Chacham's idle chatter tells you how great a chacham he is. Sichas Chulin is not a big deal. It's idle chatter. It's nonsensical, extraneous thoughts. But in those nonsensical, extraneous thoughts, you see how powerful the mind is, that this is the aftergrowth, this is the fallout. It reveals what's going on inside. Through this dafke nikir, it's evident that the source of these ideas is incredibly great intellectual, which has great depth, which is why this is what spills out of him. So again, notice how he puts together the mashal of Mayim and the mashal of Chochmah, because it's a class, it's a category. It's a category where we're not dealing with such abstraction like light. It's a category we're dealing with more applied, like ideas and like water. And again, the principle is the same, that you know how full the barrel is. You know how great the intellectual is by what spills out of him, even though what spills out of him is remote. And of course, the nimshal is that something which has a higher source falls lower. That's why in the Yesh HaNivri, only in the Yesh HaNivri, you know the Yesh HaAmiti. And then comes the third mashal, mashal HaGimel, umashpas hatipa bagashmi. A seed, a zera, that carries within it the entire code of the Father, and it's implanted in the rechem, in the joint with the tipas hanukva, and together they create new life. And this is it's a seed, a physical seed that's representative, that carries within it, that encapsulates within it the essence of what a person is, and it happens dafka through a physical seed. It doesn't happen through metaphysics, it doesn't happen through light, it doesn't even happen through the equivalent of water, but it happens through a seed. Now, the seed is obviously not seen as mayim, it's seen as rakia, as the third step. Which produces a new life, which is where something of substance creates something else of substance, where the second thing of substance is not a radiation of the earlier thing of substance, but it's fundamentally separate. Children come from parents, and in so many ways they're like their parents, but they're not a continuation of their parents. They belong to themselves. Because the parents give their child what's called a hashpoah atzmis. They give them something very deep, but they give something which is very deep that has their very essence inside of it. And what's their essence? As I've explained to you in many classes in the past, their essence is their separateness from their parents. And because the essence of each person is their self-identity, when they communicate that essence to their children, they give their children a self-identity of their own, distinct and separate from their parents. And what's the vehicle to carry this essence? A physical seed, a physical drop. Because Ruchnius cannot bring the essence so low. This is explained in Samach to Samach, Reish and Zayin, and in Ranat, and in many places, that to give over the essence of what you are, it has to be communicated by something which is not at all spiritual. Because if you want to communicate everything that you are through a spiritual medium, all the spirituality in the world can't carry infinity. And spirituality means ideas, feelings, sensual experiences, and all of them together cannot reveal what the essence of a person is. But a physical seed can. Because a physical seed is not revealing all of the person, it's simply carrying it in a hidden way. So the Rebbe explains, Muhus Chodesh, Mash'enken, this is impossible, Ba'ashpoas HaSeichel. If one were to communicate ideas for 1,000 years, you wouldn't create another person. She'ashpoah Ruchnis, which is a metaphysical, a spiritual communication, you can't create new life. And as the rule is, only when the student, the child, has a mind of his own before you begin to teach him, then it becomes possible for him to learn, because you don't communicate a brain to the student, you communicate ideas to the existent brain of the student. And at the tipa, you're actually creating the mind of the child. When it's understood, the advantage of this third analogy of a physical tipa, only from the physical tipa, a new substance, an independent substance, independent self-identity is created, which is a separated muhus from its earlier muhus, even though it comes from the earlier muhus, which is what a child is. So the Mittel Rebbe wants to explain the principle, though something has a higher source, it falls lower. So the first example is light. The brighter the light, the farther it'll travel. The second example is water and ideas. The more water you have, the more concentrated the idea is, the lower it'll reach. And the third is the idea of tipa, that when you want to give out your essence, you give it through a physical point. Since it's the lowest thing, it's able to carry the highest essence. Now these three examples are in a Maimah from the Mittel Rebbe, and again, as you see yourself, it's really not three, it's four. Because Mayim and Seichel are joined together. And in as much as the discussion of Kol HaGavaya B'Yesed, Yered Lamata B'Yesed is concerned, they're not indifferent. There are three different examples. All of them make the same point. A greater torch travels a greater distance. A more full barrel spills over more. And the seed of a person can carry his essence. All three of the illustrations say the same basic idea. That when you have more of something, it goes to a lower level. But the Rebbe wants to add something else to this conversation. And there's something else that the Rebbe wants to add to this conversation is that even though it's true that all three examples say the same thing, a greater light travels a greater distance, a greater concentration of ideas travels a greater distance, the essence of a person is manifest in the physical seed, which travels a greater distance, all three are saying the same. But specifically, he wants to argue that the lower mashal is even a greater expansion from a higher source to a lower source than the mashal before. In other words, the mashal of Rakia, which is Tipa, as you see momentarily, is not just another case where you see that something which has a higher source descends lower, but something which has an even higher source is descending even lower. In other words, when you talk about Ohr Mayim Rakia, and you speak about Ohr Mayim Rakia as separate ideas, the level of Ohr is spiritual. A greater Ohr travels lower. The level of Mayim is spiritual. The greater the Mayim, the lower it travels. The level of Rakia is physical, or closer to physical. And the greater Rakia, concentration of Rakia you have on high, the lower it falls. The Rebbe wants to argue another point, that because Rakia is lower, the whole realm of Rakia has a higher source, and it therefore extends to a lower source. In other words, it's not only that all three ideas are saying the same thing, but actually that the third idea is saying it better than the second idea, and the second idea is saying it better than the first idea, based on the fact that Rakia is fundamentally lower than Mayim, and Mayim is fundamentally lower than Ohr, and therefore, in addition to what they have in common, the lower of the three castes has a basic source and a higher level than the higher level has, because it has a lower manifestation. But let's read it inside first. It says, now that I gave you all three Mishalim from the middle of Rebbe's Maimon, about the principle of Kol HaGavaya B'Yesed Yered Lamata Yesed, there's a higher source that descends lower. I want to dabble. I want to analyze. Bebir Inyan Gimel HaMishalim. In explaining the three analogies, and of course the basic question which some Maimonim would ask is, what's wrong with two? Why you need three? What's wrong with one? Why do you need two? And in this case, why do you have to have these three? So the Rebbe says, the whole idea that because something has a higher source, it falls to a lower level, says the Rebbe, it means how godliness comes to the lowest worlds. Because the way godliness comes to the higher world, you don't say that. Because since the world of Atzilus, even though it's the lowest world within the godliness map, the godliness scheme, but because it reveals godliness, you can't call it low. And because you can't call it low, you can't really argue this case of what's higher falls lower. Or to say it in other words, the idea that something that has a higher source falls lower really only begins in worlds that are truly separate from Hashem. But in worlds that are close to Hashem, what is higher is closer and what lower is further. Just like the example of the two beams that we talked about in Perek, Beis and Gimel. A beam of light, in its source, it's greater than in its distance. Alternatively, a column, a physical column, on the ground is its beginning, its source, is its full strength. So all of the worlds, till Atzilus, even though the worlds higher than Atzilus have greater light, the Atzilus has a lower light, you don't apply the principle of what's higher falls lower. To the contrary, you apply the principle that the further you go, the less light you have. The idea that there's a world so low, where you say that the fact that anything of godliness reaches there is a simon, is a sign of a higher source, is only in the lowest worlds. So all three Mishalim that he brought here, of light reaching lower, and water and ideas reaching lower, and a tipa reaching lower, really only apply in Bria, not in Atzilus and not higher than Atzilus. Because in Atzilus and higher than Atzilus, you would say that what's higher and what's closer is more. and what's lower and what's farther is less. You wouldn't apply the logic that what fell lower has a higher source. But Bria, you do say that, because it's yesh. Ve'ein ze namach, it's not considered low. Ve'akavada ben yenamach, the notion of something being low, to the extent where you say that in order for godliness to reach it, has to come from a higher source. It's only beginning from the world of Bria, where there's independence from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to one degree or another. The three worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiyah. So he says, in the higher world, till Atzilus, you wouldn't apply the principle of Kol HaGavei B'Yeser Yed Lamata Yeser. And accordingly, until Atzilus, including Atzilus, you would not apply the principle that in Eish, Ohr Mayim Rakia has a mile over Mayim and a mile over Ohr. As I told you in my lengthy introduction, the way Ohr Mayim Rakia work is Ohr is more abstract, Mayim is more applied, and Rakia is completely applied. So Ohr is higher, Mayim is in the middle, Rakia is in the end. Until Atzilus, the constant is that Ohr is more than Mayim, Mayim is more than Rakia. That's the end of the conversation. The Rebbe wants to argue that beginning with Bria, just like in general, beginning with Bria, can you begin to make the statement that something has fallen so low must have a higher source? You can more precisely make the statement that when you're talking about how Ohr Mayim Rakia reaches the lower worlds, Rakia reaches lower because it has a higher source than Mayim, and Mayim reaches lower because it has a higher source than Ohr. And the Rebbe makes a reference to the Modim of Tishrei of Tafshin Yutas. And I'll be honest, I learned through quickly the Maimet Teretziv and the Maimet Tzur Tu'uda. And it's really near the end of the Maimet Tzur Tu'uda where the relevant idea to us is discussed. In the Maimet, the Rebbe discussed about Ohr Mayim Rakia on a lot of levels. But towards the end of the second of these Maimorim, the Rebbe adds, when he's talking about Ohr Mayim Rakia, that Rakia is the lowest and has the highest source, based on the principle that our Perek is based on Kol HaGavei B'Yeser. Kol HaGavei B'Yeser, Yed Lamata Mata B'Yeser, which only begins in Elam HaBriya. V'hinei, say that Am Shacha B'Elam is B'Yahu, the way things come into the lower worlds, just like things come into the higher worlds. In the Seder of Ohr Mayim Rakia, the same is true that in the lower worlds it comes in the order of Ohr Mayim Rakia. Be'efen the Ohr Mayim Rakia, first you have light, which is a complete abstraction. Then you have water, which is a fluid form. In other words, it's not as abstract as light, but it's not as hardened and fixed as Rakia. And then comes Rakia. Commission is Bar Baruch of Mamorim, the Chedesh Tishrei, says as I discussed Mamorim of Tishrei from Tafshin Yutes. This year it's 60 years ago. You see, but the Rebbe is saying two things. Till Atzilus you have Ohr Mayim Rakia. And then much lower than Atzilus, you have Ohr Mayim Rakia. But there's a basic difference between how you understand Ohr Mayim Rakia until Atzilus, and how you understand Ohr Mayim Rakia in Bria. And the difference is that until Atzilus, you understand Emet, Ohr Mayim Rakia in such a form that Ohr is always higher than Mayim, Mayim is always higher than Rakia, and you never reverse that. Because of the mashal of the beam of light. The beam of light's foundation is on the top, and the further away goes from its source, the less light you have. Beginning with Bria, you have the question of how does Bria exist altogether? It shouldn't be. Because it's a creation. And because beginning with Bria, you have the question of how Bria exists altogether, it shouldn't be. Because it's a creation, you have to say, Kvayachal, the Eibusha digs deeper for it to emerge. And the Rebbe says, in Bria also you have the sequence of Ohr Mayim Rakia. In the lowest worlds, where the principle of a higher thing falling lower is true, you still have the sequence of Ohr Mayim Rakia. In other words, in Bria also, and in Asiyah also, Ohr is higher than Mayim, and Mayim is higher than Rakia, at least on the superficial level. It's only on the deeper level that it's turned upside down. Let's continue to read. This is Pshat in the middle of Rebbe. You know why he brings three examples? Hamashal Da'avuka, the example of a torch, because it's Ohr. And of course, it doesn't mean physical light, he means metaphysical light. And as I explained to you at length, the concept of metaphysical light means a realm where everything is unified into a oneness, which is even more plain than a fluidity. It's just light. And then you have the mashal achavis of a barrel, which is also the mashal of seichel, which is like mayim. And then you have mashal tipa, which is rakia. In this case, tipa is compared to a solid, not a liquid, a solid, called rakia. Because shenasa geshem umhus chadash, it's something that comes from the essence of a person's mind, becomes a physical thing. For lachein, which is why this is the Rebbe is bringing Pashta Shtikl Raya of Nigla to this transference from Ed to Mayim, Mayim to Rakia. Maya da Aglidu, when water congeals, water hardens, which means basically when it becomes ice or snow, it stops having the disqualification of being water which was collected, because it stops being a liquid and it becomes considered a solid. According to some opinions, if you would then take this ice, which was once puzzle, because it was Mayim Shu'uvim, and put it in a mikveh and let it melt, it wouldn't become, you wouldn't say that the psul of Shu'uvim would come back. It's a brand new Metzias, because the old water is gone, and the new water came from the ice, which was in between the water, and it makes it into a new Metzias. This, again, this is not our conversation, but one of the ways they prepare a mikveh of rainwater in cities, that they go to places where there's ice, which comes, of course, from rain, and they would put it in buckets, like milk crates, that have holes, so there would be a keli making puzzle. They would take a freezer truck, and they would spill it into the boiler of make shamim, and let it melt. And you wouldn't worry about shu'uvim at all, because it was frozen when you took it. And this is the nimshal of rakia. It stops being a liquid and becomes a solid. So the Rebbe now continues. V'hinei. I just want to repeat one more time. We're explaining Emer throughout Seder Ishtalshus. All over Seder Ishtalshus you have this sequence, Ohr Mayim Rakia. But until a certain point of Ishtalshus, we say the sequence of Emer, but we always say Ohr is higher than Mayim, Mayim is higher than Rakia. At the very end of Ishtalshus, you start talking about this phenomenon called Chiddush, real newness, and you ask how does it exist, and then you argue that if in order to come so low as to have a higher source. So here we start to add to our understanding of Ohr Mayim Rakia another dimension. And the other dimension is that on the surface, Ohr is higher than Mayim, and Mayim is higher than the Rakia, but under the surface, in its source, Rakia has the highest source. And this is what the Rebbe is now going to explain. And I believe that the Rebbe holds that this is what the Middle Rebbe is trying to allude to. That even though you can say Kol HaGavaya B'Yesa Yered Lamata Yesa using Ohr, or using Mayim, you dafka bring all three mashal of Ohr Mayim Rakia, because the lower idea is a higher Kol HaGavaya and a lower Yered Lamata. V'hinei. 4 lines in the bottom of page Samach Zayin. I explained, the Rebbe says I explained, 60 years ago, Tafshin Yutes, in the Maram of Tishrei, Asher Inyin Bechinas Emer, the idea of Eish Mayim Ruach, Ohr Mayim Rakia, Eidirak Bibyaz, not only in Byakim, Gam Batzilsu, but Kesser, Lamala Yeser, Ad Ve'educated Mitzimtzum, in every level there's the principles of Ohr Mayim Rakia. Vim can move it, and accordingly it's understood. Ashagam Sham, in every place, you shayech kol hagimel mashalim. You can say all 3 examples of avuka chavez v'tip. That the light which is higher falls lower, the water which is more falls lower, the tipa which is an inyan atzmi falls even lower. Ubechol mokem u'mokem, in each place. Ubechol darga darga, in each step. Hinei gili agavaya yeser hu b'hanomach nomach v'yeser. If it has a higher source, it's revealed even lower. What this means? Asher behanomoch behayeser baha'elamahu, that within each individual world, in the lower level of that world, mizgale hagaveya beyeser shebe'elamahu, you reveal the highest aspect of that world. But you see, in the meantime, when you say that as a higher source is falling lower, the higher source is Ohr, and therefore falling lower would be from Ohr, then from Mayim, and then from Rakia. As opposed to in Biyah. Because in Biyah, you don't only say that what has a higher source falls lower in a particular world, but you say that amongst the 3 of Ohr Mayim Rakia, because Rakia has fallen the lowest, it has the highest source in Atzmus. V'hinei. B'klol lo Seder Ishtalshus. The Seder Ishtalshus as a whole. The lowest world is Bri Yitzir Nasiyah, V'adel Masiyah, the world of Asiyah. And as the Rebbe said before, it's not like Atzilus, where Atzilus, because it's considered a lakus, Ein Zeh Namuch. Says the Rebbe, Hine Sham, in the lowest worlds, and specifically in our world, Mizgala Hagavaya B'Yeser is revealed the highest source. Shalamayla Mehagavaya Gavaya B'Yeser, which is higher than the highest height which could possibly be revealed Shebe'erech HaAtzilus, in the world of Atzilus. Olamayla Me'Atzilus V'Kedem Atzimtzum Shvatz Musim Husay. Hine Hu Mizgala Ba'Tachten Tachten B'Yeser. This is revealed in the very lowest worlds. Meaning to say again, that it's true that what's higher in every world falls lower even within that world, but it conforms to the law of Ohr Mayim Rakia. Ohr is higher than Mayim, so it falls lower. Mayim is higher than Rakia, so it falls lower. Here we're saying something different, that because these are the lowest worlds, the Rakia itself has the highest shadish. And the Rebbe says, the Kefel HaLoshen Tachten Tachten, twice the lowest. Moira La Yese Tachten She'efshiri, shows of the lowest it could possibly be. Shein Tachten Lamata Mimenu, nothing can be lower than this. V'hu Inyan Elam Asiyah. This is the concept of the world of Asiyah. To be sure, before we continue reading, I just want to say a couple of things. Number one, I'm repeating again that I looked up the Maimorim, Teirat Tziva and Tzur Tu'uda. And in the Maimir Tzur Tu'uda, near the end, the Rebbe says what I'm telling you. That the principle of Kol HaGavaya Gavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata Mata B'Yeser, has two ideas, right? That a higher Ohr extends lower, a lower Ohr doesn't extend as low, a higher Mayim extends lower, a lower Mayim does not extend as low, and the same is true of Rakia, but there's a second point. And the second point is that because Rakia is the lowest, the entire scheme of Kol HaGavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata B'Yeser, is truer in Rakia than it is in Mayim and it is in Ohr. He does both of those things, and that's how I'm teaching this to you. I believe that this is the pshat, but I'm not 100% sure. So I just wanted to clarify that this is my source of how I'm teaching it to you. And I suppose this is what I want to say. You see, the Rebbe gives a mashal from Ohr for Kol HaGavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata Yeser. He gives a mashal from Mayim of Kol HaGavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata Yeser. And he gives a mashal for Rakia for Kol HaGavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata Yeser. But the mashalim are not the same. I'll tell you why. Because in the mashal of Kol HaGavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata Yeser, how does it work? A greater light comes to a lower level, right? But when it comes to a lower level, the light is tiny. The light reaches a very, very low level, but it reaches a very, very low level in a diminished state. And the lower it is, the less it is. And the same is true of Mayim. But in Tipa, it's not that way. In Tipa, it's called Agavaya Gavaya B'Yeser, Lamata Mata B'Yeser. And in the Mata Mata B'Yeser, you have more than you can have any place else. The physical seed carries the life of an entire living creature and creates a brand new life. The mashal of zera, of a seed, of a tipa, is a physical analogy for Kol HaGavaya Gavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata B'Yeser, with an additional nuance, or additional emphasis, that in the Lamata Mata you have more than in the Maila Maila. And this you don't have in Eid and Mayim. This you don't have in the higher worlds. And I think this is what the Rebbe is trying to add by bringing this whole Perek Dalet here. Right? What was the question? The question is, if we have two concepts of a pole that the higher it is, the richer it is, and the lower it is, the less it is. And then we have another kind of pole which is dafka lamata, atzmus, because it comes from atzmus and hus. Why shouldn't we say that just as you have atzmus down here, you have atzmus in the spiritual worlds? And the answer is by introducing us to the idea of Kol HaGavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata B'Yeser, everything is a higher source, falls lower, as it's articulated in Emer, Eish, Mayim, and Ruach. I'm sorry, I keep making that mistake. In Ohr Mayim Rakia. So first of all, you have Ohr Mayim Rakia in the higher worlds, Ohr Mayim Rakia in the lower worlds, and it's different. And second of all, in Ohr and Mayim, when something comes from a higher level to a lower level, it's diminished. In Rakia, which the mashal is tipa, when it comes from the higher level to lower level, it remains exactly the same. And this is the ultimate idea of Kol HaGavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata B'Yeser. And this is the answer to the question which our Maimer began. it's not only that because Gashmias is Yeshus and it's so low, it's Mushish, in the Yeshus of Atzmus and Hus, but that in this low level, the Yeshus of Atzmus and Hus comes without any change whatsoever. That's how low is. In other words, a different Echus of Nomoch B'Yeser. So it has a different quality of Gavaya B'Yeser. It isn't only that something higher is necessary to reach something lower, but that it reaches something lower exactly as it is in the high, because that's how low it is, and therefore how deep it reaches. And it's only in Gashmeis, it's not in Ruchnias. And I believe this is what the Rebbe is trying to add to our understanding by introducing us to the idea of Ohr Mayim Rakia and Kol Gavaya B'Yeser, Yered Lamata Mata B'Yeser, 2 times, because he wants to argue that it's not only that it's also in Gashmias, but that it's exclusively in Gashmias. And again, I'm repeating, I taught you the Maimid here, based on the Maimid Tzor Tu'uda, and I hope I'm not misleading you. If I am, I'm just misleading you a little bit. The basic Higoyin is true, but maybe some of the details, the way I'm teaching it, is not what's written in what the Rebbe means, but this is how I understood it based on the help of that other Maimid. And now let's finish. Page Samach Ches, 6 lines in V'zehu Inyan. This is the notion Sha'amudim Nitzavim Baraz Daf. We have 2 types of poles. One kind of pole, which I'm did by crushing, is a ruchni, is like a beam of light. That the higher it is, the greater it is, and the lower it is, the less it is. And even here we could say that if it's a stronger light in the source, it'll extend lower in its manifestation, but it'll become less and less. And then we also have the beam, which is from earth to heaven. It's dafka on earth, to the exclusion of all the higher worlds. The kishatorech livnes habayis chema godl. One must build a large bayis chema, a house with a wall around it. Vo'in yigedulas havaya, which is of course an allusion to the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a play on the word godl. Beis chema godl. Godl is gdulas havaya, the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course it says in Gemara, it's brought in Tanya Makam shata meitz mimosa gidulas shamata meitz anvesanus. That when you find the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're seeing His humility. In other words, our ability to see His greatness is because He's reaching so low for us to be able to observe. But of course the argument is, when we observe the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because we're so low, we're actually seeing less of His greatness. But we're only seeing the greatness which is observable to us. So Take, Hashem is so great that His greatness reaches us also. But then there's another idea. Hashem is so great that His greatness reaches us only. And that's the inyan of Tipa. That's the inyan of the second mashal of Amud. Hine, B'chol say dirish ta'ashas throughout, say dirish ta'ashas af sheyesh b'chines emer b'chol ha'madreges, there's Ohr Mayim Rakia, a higher light and a lower light and a lower light in each step. And within that scheme, Ohr is more, Mayim is less, Rakia is even less. But each one has the capacity to reach very low, if their source is very high, to reveal the highest of the high, which means the Eibishter of Himself. And not only is it revealed also in Gashmias, in other words, Hashem's truth is so great that it reveals itself a little bit here, it reveals itself only here. And it reveals itself only here and reveals itself completely, like the Mashal of Tipa. It's revealed in the very lowest level, Shu'elam Asiyah, which is the world of Asiyah. Ubasiyah Gufa, in the world of action itself, Lei Basiyah Ruchni, is not in the spiritual Asiyah, Ki Basiyah Gashmi, the material Asiyah. Ubizeh move on, which allows us to understand, Shigam Basiyah Gashmi is Gufa, in the physical Asiyah itself. So Ragam Ken Hatachten Tachten B'Yeser, you need the very, very lowest things. V'hainu, this means, Asher is Galos Ha'atzmus, that on this earth, the revelation of the Eibishter Himself, Eina Ba'aveda Haruchnis, our spiritual struggles, and our spiritual sacrifice, and even our Kabbalah sale, is not a seat for Atzmas and Huz. Kiyim Basiyah Gashmi is Afka, physical action. Which is why it says in the Kutatei in Pashas Shlach, when he uses the Mashal of Amudim Shem Bar, it's the same example. The Berdei Amudim Yachaziko Asabidyan Va'tikra Shal Gaba, for the pole to hold up everything which is above it. The earth has to be hard. The earth itself, which is even lower than the pole, has to be hard, as opposed to being porous and soft. The same is true of mitzvahs. In hard earth, which means physical actions. It's written in Shlach, Basi Legani, that the action has the highest source and it comes to the lowest levels, who are mitzvahs and slapshu, begashmi is dafka, the physical behavior performance of mitzvahs. So here's the additional insight that this Perek adds. That in the spiritual, in the physical world, all the ruchnias within the gashmias, the Mesiris Nefesh and this Kafi and this Hapcha and the Kabbalah Seil, it's all ruchnias. And even though you say Kol HaGaveh B'Yeseh, Lamata Mata B'Yeseh, but the lower it comes, the less it is. And then you have the Asiya itself. The Asiya itself is the Derech Mashal, the Tipa. That's only here that you have the revelation of Atzmos. And like I'm saying, and I hope I'm right, the Atzmos which you have here is complete. It's not a touch of Atzmos which can reach, quote, even Gashmias, but it's Atzmos itself, which is only in Gashmias, based on the principle of Kol HaGaveh B'Yeseh twice. You had Lamata Mata B'Yeseh twice. Now I will admit that we could still explain it more, but I've given you a very long class and enough information for you to explore it further. And Shkiyes mi Yovin, and Im Shagisi Hashem Atev Yechaper Ba'adi, and Emitz Hashem, the next time we'll continue to learn Perek Zayin.